And we're recording.
Right.
Good. Is it evening over there right now?
Yes, it's fine.
Good evening, Rob.
Good
So
evening. Yes.
before we start off, I actually wrote to Rob today, not today, a week ago, asking him how he wanted to be addressed. So it was either Rob or Zendexor, the supreme magnificent something something, and the second name is maybe a little bit too long, so I thought Rob would do.
Correct, yes.
All
That's the
right.
best one. That's the best one.
Yes. All right, Rob. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about? Let's start off with a bit of self-introduction, why don't we?
Yes, if you like, I'm the webmaster of Solar System Heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore, in that respect, I'm mostly a critic
Mm-hmm.
exploring the settings,
Mm.
most interested in the settings of traditional old solar system stories. And I also am an author and have put some of my stories on the site, and so have other people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's plenty of fiction on the site, but there's
Mm-hmm.
even more literary exploration and criticism.
Literary exploration.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Exploration of various settings and various
Mm-hmm.
stories. For example, probably we're going to talk about the moon
Mm-hmm.
this evening, and there's on the site a big page, a long page about the moon
Mm-hmm.
and about various versions of the moon that have appeared in literature,
Mm-hmm.
inhabited or uninhabited,
Mm-hmm. And
various.
uh, and maybe would you be able to tell us what led you? Why are you specifically interested in the old solar system, and why did you? How did the OSS website come to be?
I suppose because it is intrinsically much more interesting than the new solar system. The new,
Yes, everything is dead out there now.
yes, or even if it's not dead, it's probably not very alive. There may be some microbes here and there, but
Yes.
you can't get away from the fact that it's not as interesting as the
Mm-hmm.
old solar system.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. So it sounds like you just find that the older stories to be much more intricate and alive than what we have now.
Yes, that's right.
More
More colourful, more alive. Yes,
more promises.
and
Hmm.
also the build-up of all that literature in the first two-thirds of the 20th century
Hmm.
has created worlds with personalities,
Hmm. Hmm.
which are now so strong that they survive the disproof of the possibility of them existing in real life.
Mm.
They have a life now, a literary life of their own, which continues.
Is there is there some work that is in your mind? I can think of H.G. Wells. Perhaps the Time Machine is very very good.
Yes, well, that's about the Earth, isn't it? But
Mm.
that's not the sort of thing I'm talking about, because
Mm.
that might still come true. But the the um, the old solar system version of Mercury, for example, with
Mhm.
its eternal hot side and cold side and twilight
Right,
belt in
right,
between,
right.
we know that that's not true. But
Mm-hmm.
because it was such a good setting for stories,
Mm-hmm.
and because some of the stories were so good, that version of Mercury now exists in its own right in our imaginations.
Right, right. And so you're saying that it has taken on a different form, but it's
It's
no
taken on
longer.
a life of its own,
Mm,
yes,
mm.
yes,
And
yes.
we'll be talking about the moon in the same way
Yeah.
later, aren't we?
Yes, the moon is
Mm.
perhaps an exception in that it was known before the space age.
Mm-hmm.
People knew roughly what the moon was like. So it wasn't a case of like with Mars and Mercury and Venus, space age discoveries of what they were really like. We already knew what the moon was like.
Right.
But nevertheless, the old stories about the moon still have their special glamour because they tell us about old ideas of how to get there. In other words, old space programs, old feelings, old emotions to do with space travel.
Yes, that's a
special case.
That sounds amazing. Can't wait to get into it. But I suppose I should talk about myself a little bit as well, just so the people listening to this later on knows who's talking to who. So I'm XJ, and I started. I submitted a short story to Rob's website. I think it's about 2 years ago now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Possibly.
It didn't really work as a short story, but that was because I never had the intention of writing it as a short story. It was just an excuse. So the little bit of that anthology competition was just an excuse for me to actually just get my ass off and start writing.
Yes.
Yes.
And stories tend to grow out of control, don't they?
They do. Yeah. And I started writing because, well, I've always been, to me, stories are a very important part of me. It's like in my lifeblood. If you cut my veins, I'm sure letters will flow out. ATCG to be precise. Yes. And so I became a visual effects artist because I loved movies as a storytelling technique. But I mean, I've been working in that field for 10 years now, more than 10 years now, and the whole time it dawned on me that I was telling other people's stories. I'm not telling my own story. And so I decided to just start doing my own. And in my line, the typical fashion for people who want to do their own stories is either to draw a graphic novel or make their own animation. But that has a lot of logistical challenges because those things are very difficult to do. They require a lot of investment in capital, in time, and in effort and talent. So I thought to myself, if I wanted to just tell a story, either I could sit down and do a literal recording and tell the story, or I could write. And writing seemed to be I can get more story out in one page of words than in a book, like a graphic novel, a full-on graphic novel. And so just letter for letter, there's just more I can tell with writing. So that's how I decided to go with. And so the story I sent to Rob was about exploring the universe, just like finding things. Yes. And the story slowly grew from there.
Yeah. And since you're speaking now as a writer, it might be a good idea in our discussion about, for example, this evening about the moon, to think of the challenges that writers might face and the opportunities they might face when trying to write stories about the moon, because it gives you, as a writer, it gives you special opportunities, I think. I know your particular story cycle is about a far future Mars, but actually that has a whole different set of opportunities you have tremendous freedom to invent a whole solar system, in fact, in the far
Yes.
future. You're doing
Yes.
what Jack Vance did for the Earth, but you
Yes.
can
Yes.
do
Yes. Dying sun. Yeah.
for
Dying
the
earth.
whole solar system.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. Because I wasn't really trying to write a science fiction story so much as I'm just like wanting to have a completely different sandbox that I can play in. And
Yes.
and
It's the setting is the source of fascination, isn't it? The
yes,
characters are important too, but it's
yes,
as you say, the sandbox they play in
yes,
that's the most fun.
yes, indeed. It's like I mean, my childhood is just filled with daydreams, you know, where my mind just wanders, and part of the feeling I wanted to recapture was that sense of just turning something over and then seeing something new, you know, like when I played with my cousins out in the forest, and well, we don't really have backyards where we grow up, but in the little patch of forest that's right near where we live, you know, everything is new to a kid.
Yes,
You
yes.
turn the rock over, and there'll be bugs, and we'll just be fascinated by the bugs because we've never seen that before, and that's the kind of feeling I wanted to recapture with that setting that I have. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember as a child I was fascinated by clouds because clouds look like mountains in the sky, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
very easy to imagine, that they are real
Mm.
worlds and mountains in the sky.
Jack and the Beanstalk. Yes.
Mm.
Wonderful. So tell us about the moon, Rob.
Yes. What would one expect from a good moon story? You might have two main possibilities: the kind of realistic moon combined, however, with the old style space program, Arthur C. Clarke, Earthlight, and that sort of thing, and the habitable moon, like as in H.G. Wells, where the moon is full of selenites. Those are the two main possibilities. But oddly enough, I think that despite what I said earlier on about criticising the actual real solar system for not being as interesting, it doesn't seem to apply to the moon. The moon is interesting whether it's alive or dead. There's something about it, the distinction, the contrast between liveness and deadness seems to be blurred in the moon. I think
Right.
it's a kind of haunting place. I think the astronauts who walked on the moon would probably agree. Some of them would anyway. Those that are still alive anyway. That there's something about some of them went religious, but it's more. It's not quite that. It's more, as I say, a feeling that the place is. Has a special mystique or a haunting kind of metaphorical atmosphere, not a real atmosphere.
And what's the nature of this mystique?
That if one knew how to pin that down,
then it wouldn't be a mystique, would it?
Well, not only that, but one would have a great plot for a story. Actually, Colin Wilson, in one of his novels, I think it was The Mind Parasites, did have a way of linking the liveness and the deadness. He had according to him, the moon in his book was quite evil, actually. There were sort of frozen intelligences in the fabric of the moon, and they weren't alive in the normal sense. They were kind of frozen into the lava, kind of energy patterns frozen in.
Right.
And the solution to that was rather drastic. The moon was kind of driven away to stop its influence on humanity. So But that was an extreme case. But you could have also another. It's just occurred to me another book where the border between live and dead is blurred. Is William F. Temple's novel Shoot at the Moon, which is on one level a good adventure story about a moon voyage. On another level, and all the characters, by the way, in that book are very well drawn, which is very unusual in that sort of book. But what they find on the moon, I still don't know whether it's meant to be alive or not, but it's a strange kind of metal that behaves in a strange kind of way, and it's very dangerous. It sort of travels along lines of magnetic force or something. I'm not quite sure.
Magnetic force.
And it can have a lethal effect, and you're left wondering whether this thing is alive or not. That's a very good example of the skill of an author exploiting the peculiar nature of the moon, peculiar psychological nature, if you like.
And why do you think we have this fascination with the moon? I mean, it's actually been the moon has always featured really heavily, like just like in all of human history, I should say.
Yes. Well, it is a very remarkable celestial body. It's the only one which one can actually perceive detail on with the naked eye, with the possible exception of sunspots. I mean, all right, if the sun's very low down, you can see big sunspots through the haze. If you're lucky, occasionally. But the moon, every month at full moon, you can see loads and loads of bright and dark patterns on the moon, and that's with the naked eye, without any astronomical help whatsoever. You can actually look at another world. It's the only way you can do that. I'd like to know more about what people in history actually thought about those bright and dark patches, what they thought they really were. I don't know much about that.
That is a very interesting question, actually. So, in Chinese mythology, we have a lady that lives on the moon. Yeah, she had a palace.
So not the man in the moon, the lady in the moon.
The lady on the moon. She had a palace. It was filled with rabbits. And she had a love affair with, well, not affair. She had a romance with a mortal down on Earth, and it was a forbidden kind of romance. So she, after a bit of drama, they could only come meet once every 3 months or something like that, and that was just basically used to explain the phases of the moon, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yes.
Yes, that's a very old Chinese myth. Yes. Yeah.
I suppose the other big mystery in astronomy, early astronomy, that's not to do with the moon, is what did serious thinkers believe about the Milky Way? They can't have guessed that it was made of millions of stars that were too far away, so that their light just blended.
Indeed.
They must have thought it. You know, they could see it. So what the heck was it? Of course, they're bound to think of myths, but there were also serious scientific thinkers in antiquity, in ancient Greece certainly, and in the Middle Ages as well. There were some serious thinkers, but I don't know what they thought about it.
Yes, I can't imagine what it was like to be a thinking person back in that time, with that kind of a night, that kind of a tapestry of stars across the sky at night, because we don't see that nowadays. I live in the city. I barely see stars. But I imagine it must have been an amazing sight way back in the day when there was a lot less light pollution.
Yes. Yes, it was. I've probably never seen a totally dark sky, but I've seen enough to realise,
Yes.
to imagine.
Yes.
And I wonder what it was like for Tycho in 1572 when there was this enormous supernova. And during all the Middle Ages, thinkers had been teaching that the heavens didn't change. And then suddenly, 1572, a bright new star.
Yes.
That must have really been spooky for the people at the time.
Yes, I can imagine that. And so, how do you think? Well, bringing the conversation back into the present, how in your critical analysis, how have writers used the moon in our stories?
Well, to get back to my two main examples, H.G. Wells and Arthur C. Clarke, I might as well deal with those extremes between the living inhabited moon and the uninhabited moon. Although Arthur C. Clarke in Earthlight did suggest there might be plant life on the moon. He thought there might be sort of plants that fed off occasional outgassings from lunar cousins, which one can believe that. You never know, there might be some. But anyway, in his other book, The Fall of Moon Dust, there's no life in the moon at all, apart from human colonists. Now, and then you have H.G. Wells' Selenites, which are absolutely brilliantly depicted. He doesn't shy away from giving us a whole civilization. A lot of writers who write about moon creatures have a rather annoying habit of writing about them just as they're about to become extinct, or just as they're dying off, or something like that. And you think, oh no, you've just created these nice, interesting creatures, and now you're killing them off.
Well,
but
it is
Wells,
a pretty barren piece of real estate up there.
but Wells actually shows them at the top of their development, and you might say that both Wells and Arthur C. Clarke are using the moon for their own purposes. Wells using the moon to show, to explore ideas of society, a sort of insect-like colony with no personal freedom, and everybody being manipulated to fill their niches in society. And Arthur C. Clarke using the moon as propaganda to show how well we might practically have space travel and colonies on other worlds and so on. But really, both of them are having fun. They're having enormous lots of fun creating their versions of the moon, and it's a joy to read them.
Yes, I agree that part of the draw of writing is just having fun, filling in all those strange possibilities. Yes. And have you? And do you have any? Sorry. Do you have any? Do you have any more recent example? Arthur C. Clarke is about two decades ago, and H.G. Wells is, of course.
Yes, well, actually, Clarke was writing in the 50s and 60s, so that's half a century ago.
All right.
Yes, but I ought to mention another writer of the 1940s, C.S. Lewis. In 1945, That Hideous Strength, which is a novel set on Earth, but in it he mentions a civilization on the far side of the moon. And, well, in fact, on the near side as well, but the near side is the dead side, where the civilization is underground, full of evil evil creatures, and they're trying to make everything artificial like themselves. They've got to live artificially because they're in a totally dead environment. Whereas on the far side, there's still some air and water
Right.
and vegetation, and the two sides are fighting, and the evil artificial technological creatures are gradually extending their rule over the more natural Lunarians on the far side. Now, he only mentions that in passing, but it would be a brilliant idea for a whole book if it could be exploited. We could just pretend, because we're old solar system writers, we can pretend that the far side of the moon is unknown, hasn't been photographed, is different from the near side. Just like we can pretend that Mercury has synchronous rotation around the sun. Or we can pretend there's canals on Mars. We can pretend what we jolly well like.
Yes.
But you were saying about more recent. Now, I don't know about more recent, really, and there's a good reason for that, which is that I'm much less interested in it. Although, if somebody were to write what I call an NOSS, New Old Solar System book, where some people are doing that now, increasing numbers are doing that, and if they were to write it about the moon, I would certainly read it. I would be very interested. Actually, I wrote on my website, I've written The Archives of the Moon, but that's a pastiche of Clarke Ashton Smith, who wrote the phrase "the archives of the moon" in one of his stories, and that one phrase got me thinking. I wish he'd written more of that. So since he didn't, I'll try and write it in his style. So
That's
an
awesome.
Of me borrowing somebody else's style.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I when you mentioned recent authors writing about the moon, the first name that came to mind was have you watched that Matt Damon movie where he was stranded on the moon and he had to get back home?
Do you mean Mars?
The Martian.
The Martian, yes. He's stranded on Mars, yes.
Well, Matt Damon's always stranded somewhere.
Oh, is he? Right.
I mean, the joke is the U.S. government spends lots of money trying to get Matt Damon home, apparently.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
So he's been stranded in other places as well, not just Mars. Right.
Yes. So so the guy that wrote that book, I think he wrote one about the moon. But I'm not sure if it would be something that interests you though. It was about I think. I'm not too sure. I think the book is called Andromeda, and there's like a city on the moon, and there was a murder, and so it was a murder mystery set on the moon. I think that is yeah. So and
yes.
And I mean, the thing about the guy that wrote those two books is I really loved how much details he puts into the science, but his writing is very functional.
I get. I'm less tolerant than I used to be of just purely functional writing. I call it jerky. I sometimes call it jerky. They sort of, verb. Subject, verb, predicate, subject, verb, predicate, simple sentences, bam, 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 bam.
Yes.
And it's like reading a tabloid newspaper,
Yes, that does describe the writing style a little bit. It was very, I could be reading a list, to be honest.
But I also would like to mention this collection, Men on the Moon, which is edited by Donald Wollheim, and that has some quite good stories in from the good old days. It has, in particular, Keyhole by Murray Leinster, which is a story, let's see, 1951 story about a creature that is found on the surface of the moon, a creature that doesn't have to breathe, and well, that's the main interesting thing about the story. If you had creatures that didn't need to breathe, that opens up all sorts of possibilities. Maybe they did have to breathe originally when the moon, when very young, had an atmosphere, but as it gradually leaked away, they could evolve away from having to breathe. You could just about believe that.
Yes.
You'd have to change the way things really would happen. You'd have to try and pretend that the moon would have retained its atmosphere a lot longer than it really would have, because it's got very small gravity.
Right.
But although you'd have to fudge the figures, the actual basic idea wouldn't be too implausible.
You know, I think the best part about writing something that's kind of science fiction is that it's just this one big what if.
Yes.
What if?
You're allowed to, it's sort of, some people might call it science fantasy, but it's got to have something related to science in it, if you like. I think that's fair enough. You don't have to have hard science. You can have sort of what I'd call elastic science.
Elastic science.
You stretch the truth.
That's a
bit.
great term. I'm going to borrow that. Elastic science. Yeah. Well, I mean, so bringing it back to C.S. Lewis, that is actually a great example of elastic science. And
yes.
and so I mean, okay, so for our listeners, C.S. Lewis is of course most well known for his Chronicles of Narnia, but his better works were much less well known, and I think like you mentioned
that hideous strength,
that hideous strength, and I was thinking Out of the Silent Planet was also in my own stories. Out of the Silent Planet was like a ghost that haunted it because it starts off with a professor who went to the pub. Did he go to a pub? No, he came to.
That was at the end. He went to the.
That was at the end that he went to the pub, but he was transported to Mars. I believe it was Mars.
Yes, he was kidnapped. Yes,
through and transported to Mars in some strange way. And that on Mars there is like this incredible ecology. It didn't feel at all like a barren desert, and that sort of a elastic science travel between worlds is haunting.
C.S. Lewis's Mars was partly realistic in that he knew the main surface of Mars was uninhabitable, but the what he called the Handramits, the canyons, were much lower. Their surfaces were much lower down, and the air had collected in them. And he thought that was breathable air. So his Mars is halfway between the breathable atmosphere of Mars of Edgar Rice Burroughs and the unbreathable atmosphere of more realistic writers.
Of course, and well, I mean, yes, but the whole thing was very, as you say, made of elastic science.
Yes, and C.S. Lewis's books have loads of tantalizing hints of other possibilities in them. One wishes he could have followed them up.
Yeah.
But
I gotta say, like I think like when I first read Out of the Silent Planet, I really did not know what to think of it. Yeah. It was not at all what I expected.
Right. What did you find some of it hard to understand or hard to accept?
Well, not at all. I was Well, I was expecting another fantasy story like Narnia. So for the
Oh, I see.
so for the first half of the book, I was expecting them to step into a portal somewhere. The the professor to step into a portal somewhere, and then start, having fights with fantasy creatures. In a sense, he did. In a sense, he did. He did step into a portal. Uh, in, but instead of Narnia, he went to Mars.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he went to Mars in his own spaceship, so it wasn't magic. Although in the second book, Perilandra, he was transported to Venus.
Yes.
No, the professor went to Venus in his spaceship as well, but it was Ransom who was transported by supernatural means
Yes. Yes.
to Venus.
Yes.
Yes.
So in a sense, they it was still a portal story in that they went somewhere through something, and but it was not at all what I expected, and there was a very heavy. Well, I mean, so the Chronicles of Narnia was very much a Christian allegory.
Yes.
So people say. I didn't feel that though when I was reading it. Certainly when I was at that age, and that I was so caught up with Arslan and all this other stuff that I just didn't feel it at all. But Out of the Silent Planet had a much heavier. I could sense it a lot more, like it was an allegory for something.
Well, perhaps allegory is not quite the right
Mm.
word, but he was at pains to suggest that the distinction that we have between myth and reality was perhaps merely an earthbound distinction, and that beyond myth and reality converge. That was his idea in that book.
I see.
But another thing, a good thing about Out of the Silent Planet was that not only the account of Mars, but also the way he got there. It's a good example of what I call slow space travel, and that you actually feel you're traveling through space, and the journey was an important part of the book.
Right.
It wasn't like the sort of annoying kind of story where the hero just gets into his rocket and whizzes all around the system in virtually no time at all.
Well, I gotta say though, as a writer now, as I'm writing my own stories, that journey of being in a rocket ship somewhere, or on a boat somewhere, or on a donkey going somewhere is very hard to write.
Yes, it is a challenge. You're right. Yes, C.S. Lewis could get round it because his hero was being kidnapped, and so he could write about the stress of that and merge that with the story, and also he could put lots of details in about how he heard little pings on the hull, which he turned out to be little micrometeorite impacts and so on, and he could look outside the ship at the heavens and think about what he thought about those, and start to feel that the heavens themselves were actually full of creatures whose natural environment was space, and he could write about how they eventually had to put warm clothing on as they moved outwards towards Mars, and all sorts of details. He put in the book to make the journey seem real.
It does. Those kind of details do help to make long journeys like that feel more alive.
Tolkien was very good at that too. In The Lord of the Rings, I don't know how he did it, but journeying down the river, the Great River, or journeying through the mountains, or anything like that, he was very good at. He managed to spin it out, and I don't know, it was absorbing.
It is. It is. It always felt it. It always felt like reading a travelogue to me. Like I was just amazed at how well he described the Shire, like the countryside. I could
Mm,
feel myself traipsing through a
yes.
little English forest because that's
Yeah.
what he was really describing.
Yes, yes, because it's sort of northwest Europe, isn't it? Middle Earth is
Yes.
kind of um, sort of sort of North Africa, Europe, that sort of
Yes.
part of the world, isn't it?
Yes. A very idyllic version of it.
Yes, yes. Um, and these these writers who write about journeys, um, they they're performing a good service by making the worlds at the other end seem like real other worlds. Because if you get there too quickly,
Yeah.
it kind of it detracts from the otherworldliness of it, doesn't it?
Yes. 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 That's very true. Stories have to be rooted in something that we can identify.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yes, and they also need to be rooted. If we're talking about the old solar system, they need to be rooted in some sort of scientific truth, although not modern scientific truth, but
That's true.
like for
Yes.
example, if you're writing about Mars, you might write like Edgar Rice Burroughs of a Mars with a breathable atmosphere and canals and so on, but you wouldn't dare to write about a Mars with Earth-like gravity, for example. I don't think you would. I think it wouldn't. You know, that sort of unrealism would fail, would make the story fail.
Wow.
And
Well.
I know that Edwin Lester Arnold did write about a
Really.
Mars with earthly gravity, but that bears out my argument because his book isn't really very good. Uh,
Oh my.
mm,
I'm not sure what to say about that. I never gave gravity a single thought when writing
uh,
about the Red Desert.
but C.S. Lewis bothers to say on in Art of the Silent Planet that the waves were a bit different in shape, you know, in
Mm-hmm.
in the rivers because of the lesser gravity. He thought it would make the waves look kind of more pointy. I don't think that's true actually. I think waves, you know, they would be slower, but they wouldn't be more pointy. And he thought the
Mm-hmm.
mountains would be more pointy as well on
No,
Mars.
turns out to be quite
Mm.
flat.
But yes, but as we know from the moon, lower gravity doesn't make for pointy mountains. But
Yeah.
uh, nevertheless, he was giving respect to some scientific ideas. If you show respect for some scientific ideas, it doesn't really matter if you get the quantities wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just creating a sort of atmosphere, a sort of
It's true.
personality to your story that makes it different from just pure fantasy.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. And so, do you have anything else you want to add about the moon?
Let's see. I had a little list of things here. Um, one last point is that I think I actually have mentioned this, that
Mm-hmm.
it annoys me a bit when stories about the moon. I mentioned how the annoying habit some writers have of creating interesting moon creatures and then mentioning that they're just about to become extinct.
Yes. Yes.
But also, some annoying writers think that you can only have moon creatures if they live underground. Wells was partly guilty of this, but at least his some of his Selenites did come to the surface to herd their moon cows, you know. Um, but I would prefer. I was disappointed with Edgar Rice Burroughs in The Moon Maid, which is a really good book,
Mm-hmm.
but his moon is hollow, and the inhabited part
Right.
is
All
like
inside.
Pellucidar. Is, you know, you live in the inside surface of the moon.
Right.
I would have preferred the action to take place on the surface. I don't know why. It's just a thing I've got that I like. I like a world to be up front and, you know, not
Wow.
just things hiding around.
Well, I suppose if it's not seen, then it's a little bit more believable. I suppose
Yes, there is that. Yes,
suspension of disbelief. I guess.
yes. Well, though H.G. Wells didn't seem to mind writing about vegetation on the visible surface of the moon. Maybe he thought the vegetation was the same colour as the rock, in which case telescopes on Earth wouldn't see it. I'm not sure about that. I have to check that one out.
That's an interesting thought, actually.
Yes, yes, you could have that, couldn't you? Or you could have leaves with the top part of the leaf showing the same colour as the lunar regolith, and underneath you could have as many colours as you like, because the telescopes from the Earth wouldn't see them. You see?
Yes, you could possibly spin an explanation for that. It that the upper surface of the leaves would reflect off the space radiation and cosmic rays, and then underneath that is
Yes.
where all the life really happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
You could.
Yeah. Just thought of that just now. Yeah. Yes. And then there's the other idea, the C.S. Lewis idea, that all the real action, the live action, is going on in the other side of the moon.
That there's that too. Yeah.
Mm.
Well,
So there we are.
that is
So
that I think we covered quite a bit.
mm,
We thought we would only cover the moon, and we kind of went to a whole bunch of other stuff. But
yes,
you
yes.
did bring up something that I thought I might want to touch on in maybe a second chat, which is journeys, and I was thinking about the hero's journey.
The journey,
The
yes.
hero's A hero's journey, and I've been
Right.
fascinated by so in terms of stories, I think all of us we resonate to a hero's journey, but the I think like a hero's journey for a man is quite different. I feel for a hero's journey for a woman,
Why do
and
you say that?
so so why do I say that? So this
It
is
could be
how
a quest. A quest could be, for either.
it could be a
Uh,
quest for either. Um, but I feel as if like just judging from the kind of stories that men and women consume, it seems like there's a clear difference between
I
what
see.
what
Yes.
we guys like and what women like. And
Right.
I
Yeah,
have been
you're probably
thinking
right
about
there. Yeah.
yeah, I've been thinking about that for quite a while. And I mean, for me, a hero's journey is very clear. Like Star Wars is a hero's journey that is very that is very it's a well traveled path. You have like the boy who had nothing sets out on an adventure to learn things, and he
Mm,
struggles, and that whole journey is him struggling and then reaching a point where he faces the his biggest obstacle, his biggest
yeah.
challenge, and then
Yeah.
either overcoming it, being defeated by it, or some kind of the other. Right?
Yes.
That is a hero's journey for. There's one type of hero's journey for men, and I've been
Yes.
thinking about what would be a hero's journey for women, and I have been thinking about the old fairy tales, Beauty and the Beast. I think
Yeah.
is could be a hero's journey for a woman, and Cinderella probably is.
Yes. Cinderella is in a way, it's an escape story, isn't it? She's
Yeah.
escaping from her poverty and
Yes.
loneliness.
Yes.
Uh, but also, that kind of story can merge with another kind of quest, which is the quest
Hmm.
to find out the truth about something.
Yeah.
If somebody is living in a situation which has lots of puzzling aspects and mysterious aspects, they can go on a journey which either consciously or not, is aimed at finding out what on earth is really going on.
That definitely is. That is a search for something, and that is definitely a hero's journey in and of itself. Yes. Well, I mean, I thought it would be very interesting to touch more on this for our next chat because it's coming up to an hour.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Well, we'll schedule quests then for the next one.
For the next one, quests. Yes, that's a great topic. Before we end off though, would you want to tell the listeners where your website can be found?
Yes, it's the name of it is Solar System Heritage, and all one word. So all three words making one long word. Solar System Heritage .com, and they can go from the home page. There's a long navigation bar with lots of stuff on it, including links to every world in the system, and every moon in the system, I think, or just about.
Right.
So, and lots of thematic links as well, which they can find quite easily, and a story archive showing all the stories that we've got online.
I can definitely second bear proof to that description. The Solar System Heritage has a great deal of links. It goes to a lot of different things. There are a lot of different stories and a lot of analysis as well.
I also have a fictional dates page where you can look up what's going to happen in the future at various years, and what has happened also.
Oh, interesting.
Alternative futures.
A predictive page. Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. And my own website is, because I have a website to host my stories as well. My website is adistancesun.com, and that is all one word. The Adventures of Longtail, which is the story that I'm writing, is a story that's set within that timeline. And so there will be more stories to look forward to once I'm done with this particular one. I might pick off with some other characters and continue the stories from there or wherever. And also...
Distant sun meaning distant in time.
Distant in time, that's true. Yes.
Yes.
Not
an extrasolar system.
No. Also, I will be sending you, Rob, a new chapter sometime later tonight for me, because I just finished one chapter, and I'll be happy to send it to you. Yeah.
Great. I'll look forward to that.
All right, Rob, it's been a pleasure, and I really look forward to the next one. I'm going to just clean up this edit, just like cut off some dead space in front and behind, and then we will just upload this on YouTube. Righty-ho. All right. Have a good night, Rob. Yeah.
Cheerio.
Cheerio.